Jan 6, 2021 was probably the most strenuous test our nation has experienced since the Civil War. There will be meetings for those who believe the attack was an attempted coup and who are disturbed by the passage of restricted voting regulations in various states as the country reflects on the year since a violent mob attempted to disrupt the certification of election results, perpetrating the big lie. There will also be gatherings for individuals who erroneously claim that former President Donald Trump won the 2020 election and refer to those jailed in the incident as political prisoners. This is a serious issue that must be properly dealt with by our government officials. Whatever dreams Americans had that 2021 would be a year of reconciliation across the political divide have been dashed. Instead, polls show increased concern about a failing democracy, the emergence of a popular movement sympathetic to insurgency, and rising support for political violence. The attack on our government appeared to generate energy that seemed to have been channeled underground in the early aftermath of the attack. The removal of key voices from Twitter, including Trump, was a key move that was desperately needed. Parler, an online meeting place for many insurgents, went offline. Fears of heightened law enforcement surveillance caused organizations like the Boogaloo Boys to cancel public gatherings. These movements aren't broken in any way, said Jared Holt, a resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, FRLAB, which has been tracking the far-right's online activity for the past year. To varying degrees, several of them have been effective in doing so. The FRLAB studied how far-right organizations refocused on a decentralized, on-the-ground approach to identify new sympathizers, particularly starting in the summer of 2021. They immersed themselves into local disputes over ethnically inclusive school curricula and school mask requirements, rather than organizing big, national protests around false claims of a stolen election. Many Republican officials reinforced the themes they communicated through that grassroots strategy, according to Mary McCord, a visiting professor and executive director of Georgetown University's Institute for Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. One of the most alarming developments of 2021 since the insurgency, in my opinion, has been the effort, particularly among influencers and politicians, to normalize mainstream conspiracy theories, most notably election denial, as well as to normalize ideologically driven violence in the mainstream political, she said. According to a recent survey by the University of Chicago's Chicago Project on Security and Threats, COAST, 21 million adults now belong to what it calls the American insurrectionist movement, which is characterized by the incorrect belief that Trump won the 2020 election and that using force to return him to the White House would be justified. What we're dealing with is a large degree of community support right across the body politic, in keeping with the sentiments of January 6, that hasn't simply vanished, said Robert Popp, director of COAST and professor at the University of Chicago. And it's incredibly worrying for the future because it implies there's a lot of dry kindling in the nation that might be touched off by a spark and develop into another wildfire. As more information on the more than 700 people arrested in connection with the Capitol attack becomes available, academics are realizing that typical counter-extremist measures in the United States may not be effective. The suspects are older, more educated, and have more economic and familial stability than right-wing violent criminals apprehended by federal police in recent years, according to a post-analysis of their social and economic demography. More than half are either business owners, they own florist businesses or are CEOs, or white-collar workers, such as doctors, lawyers, and attorneys, Popp added. To see middle-class whites participate in this kind of collective political violence, you have to go all the way back to the advent of the second KKK in the 1920s. It's historically noteworthy, to say the least. However, Popp added that post-study found a distinguishing factor that separates insurgents from the rest of the population: belief in replacement theory. They are really concerned about the idea that white rights are being supplanted by minority rights, or that the Democratic Party is bringing in immigrants to purposely change the country's demography in order to disenfranchise current conservative supporters, Popp said. Replacement theory, which was once considered a fringe concept, is now becoming more mainstream. Some Americans' willingness to believe it reveals the same flaw that caused a mob to attack the Capitol based on election fraud rumors. We can't monitor and ignore our way out of this, said Cynthia Miller Idris, a professor and director of the Polarization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab at American University. People must have the knowledge and abilities to discern propaganda for what it is. Republicans overwhelmingly accepted Trump's great lie of a stolen election after the November 2020 election. We now have an example of what occurs when a Trumpist Republican Party loses an election, and every reason to believe it may happen again, thanks to the January 6 violence and its aftermath. According to a Grinnell-Seltzer poll released in October, 60% of Republicans are not sure that votes would be counted correctly in the 2022 midterm elections. Election officials have received an extraordinary number of violent threats, virtually entirely from Trump supporters who fear the 2020 election will be rigged. And Republican elites are adding to the conflagration. Party leaders and their media allies are legitimizing political violence in the face of electoral defeat, with Trump describing slain writer Ashley Babbitt as a martyr, Tucker Carlson producing a pro-insurgency documentary called Patriot Purge, and GOP members of Congress doing their best to obstruct the House probe into the attack's origins. Republican leaders' actions are all the more concerning because elites may play a significant influence in either sparking or suppressing violent breakouts. Mason and co-author Nathan Kalmoe conducted an experiment in their upcoming book Radical American Partisanship to see how elite speech affects Americans' readiness to act in violence. They discovered that showing Republican partisans a message ascribed to Trump condemning political violence reduces their readiness to support it significantly. Experts agree that solutions will involve participation and action from a variety of stakeholders, including church leaders, educators, and politicians, in addition to law enforcement. They also agree that the path to those solutions is currently unclear. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy our content, please like, share, and subscribe.